our team and find out what is really going on.
BBC World News America.
From Kyiv, our headlines this hour: divisions in Europe over whether to ban Russian imports of oil. The Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban compares a proposed EU ban on Russian oil imports to dropping the Ukrainian city of Mariupol, but reports say the Russian assault on the Azov steelworks is still continuing.
And I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Also coming up here on Impact, police in Israel are searching for two men after
Hello, welcome to Russian oil imports by the end of this year. Mr. Orban said the proposals had crossed a red line and that Hungary would veto them in their current form because, he said, they would have a devastating impact on his country's economy. Hungarian state radio.
We are interested in cooperation and dialogue with the EU, but that is only possible if they take our interests into account. It is not acceptable that they ignore us and make proposals which are against Hungarian interests. Far introduced have caused more trouble for the European economy than for the Russian one. I do not consider them a good tool anyway.
So that's the Hungarian Prime Minister. Let's get the latest on this with our Europe correspondent Bethany Bell in Brussels.
From the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. It's not clear exactly how that translates when it comes to negotiating the nitty-gritty of this oil embargo sanctions package. What we understand is that ambassadors from the EU are negotiating over this at the moment. There are possible areas where they say they could perhaps have a longer transition period for Hungary, also more money. Negotiations still underway at the moment before any decision could be reached as to whether there will be this oil embargo on Russian oil.
And I suppose the danger is, from the EU's point of view, from Ursula von der Leyen.
Possible for Russia. In the words of Ursula von der Leyen, they wanted Russia to pay a high price for the war in Ukraine. On the other hand, what we understand is that the oil that would go to Hungary, and including gas, and that is a much, much more difficult prospect for the EU.
All right, Bethany, thank you very much. Bethany Bell reporting there. Well, the United Nations says a third operation is currently underway to try to rescue civilians. Who are still trapped in the bunkers and tunnels beneath that steelworks. That includes about 30 children. Well, elsewhere, where Russian forces have retreated here in Ukraine, whole towns are now having to be completely rebuilt. This report upsetting.
Makariv isn't a big place. 10,000 people live here, but the Russians saw it as an important route to Kyiv. This town found itself at the heart.
This was my second home, and when you find out that your home is burnt and destroyed, my heart ached and my soul was in pain.
Discovered around 100 bodies in the area. Many more are missing. Posters are dotted around the town. However, spring is bringing some signs of healing. This The route to recovery is going to be long and difficult, but it's a path people here are determined to take.
It's difficult, of course, but we keep on living. Our house is destroyed, not completely, so we have a place. Carry on.
And so does this war. The threat of further attacks hasn't gone away. James Waterhouse, BBC News in Makariv.
Well, let's talk now to a member of the Ukrainian Parliament here in Kyiv, Lesya Vasilenko, who joins me at our position here in the city. Thanks very much indeed for being with us. We're more than 70 days into the war now. It seems to have reached in some areas a kind of stalemate. What is your view of how the fighting is going?
Russia will be to its goal, to the dismemberment of Ukraine. Now, Ukraine cannot afford to play the game of fighting a long war. Neither can Europe, neither can the world. And the goal is for Europe and the world to stand and end this with Ukraine's victory.
And in terms of trying to get a victory, what more help do you think this country needs, your country needs from the West? There are a lot of weapons coming in here already. Do you need more weapons, and do you need a
to be able to be using them already now at the front lines, be it artillery, be it missiles, ammunition, tanks. We need it all, and we need it now. This is how things stand. Because again, I will reiterate, we cannot.
And they've won some territory in the east and almost in control of places like Mariupol. How do you see an eventual peace settlement? I mean, do you see a sort of compromise where they're allowed to hold on to certain areas, or are you
appeasing the aggressor? And appeasement, as we know very well since 1938, they never work. They just incite more aggression and more greed for land grabs. And this is exactly what happened back in 2014, when a form of
think they can be safely evacuated from there, those women and children who are still in there?
I hope so, and all of Ukraine prays for these people to be brought into safety, and mainly to be brought into safety into Ukraine, not to be deported to the Ukrainian government, but also with our partners from the UN, from the Red Cross, to make this evacuation happen as quickly and as swiftly as possible for the sake of the lives of these innocent civilians which are trapped there.
Okay, Lesya Vasilenko.
Pieces of the country. It's as part of a shutdown called by trade unions and activists who want the government to resign. Protests have been going on for weeks in the island nation over the Sri Lanka's worst ever economic and cost of living crisis. Well, we can speak to you. Now, yours is one of the groups heavily involved in these protests. I'm wondering, what is the situation like on the ground? Are things calming down? Is the government indeed listening?
Or they are not going to bring a solution till that means. And from the other end, President and the Prime Minister or the Cabinet, they are not looking at solutions, because they try different solutions. You have to go home. So, but the thing is that they are not listening to that one. Only thing is that they are doing is divergence and delaying. That's their strategy at the moment.
Okay, so you're saying that they're not listening. From Sri Lanka's ruling family, admitting that the government has made mistakes. He was speaking to our South Asia editor, Ambarasan Ethirajan, but he is laying the blame on economists advising the government badly. Who's at fault here, do you think?
Good job. So if they aren't unable to do that, then the blame should go to them, not for anyone else, because they were looking in wrong places. And the other thing is that they are not capable to understand who is capable and who is not capable. So that's the biggest issue. And that's black markets for banking, etc. So that was one of the major issues that we had in this crisis. So we can't say that it was an advice from economists.
of really having a big impact on ordinary Sri Lankans. Is that something that you would be willing to negotiate, an IMF bailout package?
Yes, in there that we need to check what are the conditions and etc. But that is one of the options. So, but the thing is that still in here, the corruption is the deciding factor. That means that at the moment that it is not the benefit or the value that pact or whatever it is.
Okay, well, Kapila Pereira, president of the Professionals National Front, one of the organisers of the protests that we're seeing across Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for your time. Lots more on our website, and also that the Labour opposition leader, Sir Keir Starmer. Durham police in the north of England have issued a statement in just the past hour saying that they are investigating whether he broke lockdown rules after footage emerged of him drinking a beer with colleagues in April 2020. Week's landmark election.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind
was prepared not to go.
Journalists are under attack in ways that we've never experienced before.
I bring that part of my Asian culture with me into everything I do.
They can kill us, and they will.
The front runner in next week's election. Well, earlier I spoke to our correspondent in the Philippines, Howard Johnson. I asked him just how Bongbong Marcos has managed to shed his family's negative image and emerge as a strong contender.
We've seen this explosion of the past, inverting them from one of economic decline to one of a golden age, a period where things were really good. Bridges were built, roads were built, and everything and everybody was happy. But actually, if you look at was taken from the country, some of that was clawed back after the Marcos family were ousted. But we're seeing channels like TikTok, Facebook, Instagram being used to promote this idea of the family being real heroes and doing great in the past. And we have seen that narrative challenged. Even when I did some work just last week, I was challenged repeatedly online. Trolls attacking my questioning of Bongbong Marcos when I was away in the last 5 years.
So that's one of the other candidates, and it's very much the power of social media there. It feels like a lot of children in the running. We've also got Sara Duterte. Tell us more about her.
Okay, yeah, so you're right about the children. There's 6 it being very easy to sort of rework it online. But Sara Duterte is the daughter of Rodrigo Duterte, the incumbent president, who's incredibly popular here, despite breaking all sorts of international norms when it came to his ruthless war on drugs in which thousands of people died. Now, Sara Duterte was the mayor of Davao, where Rodrigo Duterte hails from, and she has had this very similar tough style. Once she repeatedly punched a sheriff in the face for disobeying her orders, and she's really taken on Rodrigo Duterte's image and combined that with Bongbong Marcos, who's from the north of
May. Now to Israel, a manhunt continues for 2 attackers who are responsible for a suspected terror attack in the central Israeli city of Elad. 3 people were killed, at least 7 others have been wounded in this incident at a park. My colleague Tim Franks.
These attackers weren't armed with firearms, but with knives and, as it turned out, apparently an axe as well, and tried to beat them off. But it was just here that a couple of the people wish here about how this could have happened in this place that up to now has been so quiet.
Tim Franks there in Elad with that search continuing for the suspects. Now to Kenya, the wildlife authorities there may be used to dealing with incidents. Frankly, armed officers rushing to the scene to trap this creature only to find It's a shopping bag. It was used by a villager who put some avocado tree seedlings in it to stop them from drying out. But, well, you can see why they got confused.
Several days ago, but still those temperatures getting back up into the low to mid 40s, and plenty of heat too across Central Asia. 27 degrees in Ashgabat, but 32 the high in Tashkent. Kabul pretty close to 30 Celsius. The heat building once again across Pakistan. Could just catch the odd thunderstorm here. Colombo certainly will see further showers. Temperatures in Islamabad getting up back into the 40s, 42 degrees by Tuesday and Wednesday. Elsewhere in Tashkent, a cool down is on the way, but it does.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising.
We really need to focus on bringing transmission down.
You've been in office for some time. What are you doing about it?
This question is without context.
What the turnout was, it was over 70%. You know how many seats your party got? Zero, Ms.
We failed to win seats, but we got more.
Talking Business Weekly here on BBC World News.
San Francisco is battling a drugs and homelessness epidemic.
What's it like living here?
Lawless. So what will it take to clean up
the headlines? Go to the BBC News website and app to answer any questions you have about the big stories of the day. Reality Check. Get the facts straight.
The ban on Russian oil to dropping an atomic bomb on his country's economy. The UN's attempting a further evacuation of civilians from the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol, but reports say that the Russian assault on the Azovstal steelworks is still.
World Business Report.
Hey, hello everybody, I'm Aaron Heselhurst. Welcome to the World Business Report. Give me about 10 minutes-ish and I'll try to give you a fascinating snapshot of all the latest in the world of business and money. Let's get cracking because I tell you what, it is the continued comeback here, 3.6%. All of this according to the latest government numbers released in the past hour. But of course, as I just mentioned in the headline, wages, they are failing to keep up with that soaring inflation that we're seeing at the moment. Let's jump straight over to New York and join our very own Michelle Fleury. Happy Friday!
Is that it shows the strength and the resilience of the US economy. I mean, bear in mind, this is happening against a backdrop of rising interest rates. There are jitters on the financial markets, fears about slowing global growth. And so against that backdrop, you've got the economy out, sort of clouds looming on the horizon, and we can get to those in a minute. But the other thing I want to mention is that, remember, at the start of the pandemic, you saw the US economy lose roughly 22 million jobs at its height. It has now recovered 95%.
Inflation. The cost of everything is going up for households, consumers. Prices are going through the roof. I'm just wondering that when consumers are seeing higher prices, they're going to have to start cutting back. If they cut back, that will hit companies. And if companies are hit,
So move on from that, and then as consumers start to adjust their behaviour to kind of the change in circumstances around them and pull back, will businesses start to pull back in hiring? Will they start to show more restraint in terms of the wage increases they're willing to give? We're starting to see signs of.
Indeed. Michelle, I've been told by the voice of God that I've got to wrap it up. Great to see you, Michelle, as always. Have a lovely weekend. Michelle Fleury joining me live from New York. Now, as if the world economy needed any more challenge.
Are shut down, but because all the hinterland connections are severely restricted, warehouses are not working, trucking capacity is limited, and that's of course causing severe disruptions there. Well, over the past but also for transportation capacity. What used to cost maybe $1,500 to $2,000 now to transport a container from China to the US West Coast now costs $10,000, $11,000. So
The finance minister says that a full embargo on Russian oil needs to happen right now. Now, the European Union, it spends, €1 billion a day buying up Russian energy. It has proposed banning Russian oil by the end of this year, but this needs to be unanimous. for one, has warned it will veto the plan. Now, I have been speaking to Ukraine's finance chief, Sergei Marchenko, for my show, Talking Business, and he told me that urgent action is needed to hit Russia's ability to fund the war. Take a look.
It's very important and so budget run with surplus. In comparison with us, we're running with very huge deficit. Russia's budget is running with very huge profits. So it's very necessary to block and to find a way how to. No, I am very practical Minister of Finance. I believe that full embargo can make Russia suffer more than it is right now.
And Sergei, correct me if I'm wrong, but Russian gas, it's still.
Either or not, they want to receive Russian gas. So now we're like a transit countries.
But Sergei, shouldn't your government just make the decision by itself and close those pipelines?
Even with Russia gas.
And of course, you can get that full interview with Ukraine's Finance Minister Sergei Marchenko on Talking Business with me, Aaron Heselhurst, this weekend. The times are on your screen now with the first one airing. There it is, Saturday, 23:30. According to government plans, the new digital markets unit will be given powers to clamp down on predatory practices in that sector and fine companies up to 10% of their global turnover if they fail to comply. Hey, the Italian luxury brand Gucci will start accepting payments in cryptocurrencies in some of its big firms. Just a quick flash of the markets. They've been down in the dumps. It's after the interest rate rise that we saw yesterday. Let's check there. They're still down in the dumps. Well, that's the European markets at the moment. US markets also, they opened a little bit, but they're still down at the moment. That's it. I've got to go. Follow me on Twitter. You can get me at BBC Aaron. Tweet me. I'll tweet you back. Have a good weekend.
Powerful and uncompromising. A force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm, nurturing and loving. B-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist since 1933. Barso se sarso.
देश के हर पल में के रंग से सजाते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम साथ निभाते हैं कल आज और कल में रहते हैं देश के हर पल में
and the latest stats and scorecards. Go online or download the app now.
This is BBC World News.
Live from the BBC Sports Centre. Coming up on this programme. Novak Djokovic is on his way to the Madrid Open semi-final. Talk about a great game. The Mets stun the Phillies with a massive ninth-inning comeback. Hurkacz, though, he took the first set fairly comfortably and wrapped up the match in straight sets 6-3, 6-4. He'll face the winner of Rafa Nadal and fellow Spaniard Carlos Alcaraz. That match starts fairly soon. Rafa remains on course for a defending champion. Alexander Zverev plays the Canadian Felix Auger-Aliassime in the last 8. Zverev's third-round opponent, Lorenzo Musetti, was forced to retire with a leg injury. Zverev won the first leg 6-3 and was one. Tsitsipas won 6-3, 6-4, and he will now face Russia's Andrei Rublev, who beat Dan Evans. Now in the English Premier League, Arsenal manager Mikel Arteta has been rewarded for his side in Paris at the end of the month. Salah, who picked up his Footballer of the Year award from England's footballers' writers on Thursday, was injured by Sergio Ramos and forced out of the game when the two sides met in the 2018 final in Kiev after Real beat.
It was a sad day for all of us, but yeah, I think it's revenge time. I said before the game I wanted to play Madrid in the final, so we got them. I'm sure it's going to be a tough game. They beat a lot of good teams, so we just need.
In Ecuador finished 4th in qualifying, claimed an automatic place in Qatar, but Chile say that Ecuador should forfeit the points gained in the 8 matches Castillo played, with each of their opponents awarded 3 points. That would see Chile move from 7th to 19 cases. The Olympic Council of Asia says new dates will be announced in the near future. The Asian Youth Games, which were scheduled to take place in December, have also been cancelled. Ukraine's Paralympic movement has been destroyed after Russia
developing our Paralympic movement. Even exist many soldiers, many peaceful people have disability from the war, and we have a possibility supporting our.
Happened. Brandon Nemo hit a single to tie the scores at 7-7, but the drama didn't end there. Just take a look at what came next. Sterling Marte finished the job for the New York with a. There's been plenty of glitz and glamour in Miami this week as Formula One makes its debut in the city. First practice gets underway in a few hours' time. This weekend's Grand Prix takes place at the Hard Rock Stadium complex, home of the NFL's Miami Dolphins.
Actually drive it in real life and see how it feels like, how the grip is like. So.
Another weekend, another big boxing fight, this time in Las Vegas as Saul Canelo Alvarez takes on Russia's Dmitry Bivol. The Mexican is stepping up in weight class yet again.
Boxing skill of Dmitry Bivol, but it's my time, and I feel in my prime, and I enjoy this kind of moments.
From me and the rest of the Sports Today team, goodbye.
कल आज और कल में देश के हर पल में कल का एहसास बन के उम्मीदों को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम साथ निभाते हैं कल आज और कल में
Every time I think about what he saw and what he went through, it makes me feel so sad. You just want to make the painting for him. Sorry.
Fluid, dynamic, androgynous. He's
Sanjay. So when events move quickly, you need to make sure you have the facts, and that's where experience counts. Having a global view really makes a difference, and shining a light on stories across.
The Travel Show, sponsored by Turkish Airlines.
Hello. Impact on aviation is the closure of large amounts of airspace, not just above Ukraine, which is more than twice the size of the UK, but also Russia, the world's biggest country. Others are routing them south of Ukraine, though this can add thousands of miles and extra hours in the air. Links between Asia and North America are also affected, with Cathay Pacific saying that its Hong Kong times plus higher fuel prices spells sharply increased costs for airlines. And while they can't pass that on to the passenger immediately because of strong competition, within a few months I fear you could be looking at higher fares a ray of light for people who still want to get away. So here are my tips to help your money travel further. The simplest way to cut costs: don't travel when everybody else is. On a recent time 3-hour flight to Lithuania, the fare was just £7. In particular, if you don't have to travel in school holidays, then avoid them. Tuesdays and Wednesdays tend to be the cheapest days to fly on, and for hours you might end up spending more on ground transport or a hotel stay. Travel with minimum luggage. This is my cabin bag and it meets all known free hand luggage allowances. Also, summer. See you again soon.
The Travel Show, your essential guide wherever you're heading, every weekend on BBC World News.
Hello, this is Impact and I'm Ben Brown, live in the Ukrainian capital Kyiv. Our headlines this hour: divisions in Europe over abandoning imports of Russian energy. The United Nations makes another attempt to evacuate civilians from the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol, but reports say the Russian assault on the Azovstal steelworks is continuing.
I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Also coming up on the program is its worst ever economic and cost of living crisis. And counting is underway in local elections in the UK. Results in England show Boris Johnson's Conservative Party has lost control of some symbolic councils in London.
We're live in Kyiv. Well, Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban has accused the head of the European Commission of undermining EU unity on sanctions over proposals to ban Russian oil imports by the end of this year. Mr. Orban said the proposal will his economy. He's been speaking to Hungarian state radio.
We are interested in cooperation and dialogue with the EU, but that is only possible if they take our interests into account. It is not acceptable that they ignore us and make proposals.
Comments from the Hungarian Prime Minister come as the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said that Russia was no longer a reliable partner. And earlier I asked our Europe correspondent Bethany Bell what this strong rhetoric from Hungary
is, where they say they could perhaps have a longer transition period for Hungary, also more money for investment in crucial oil infrastructure in countries like Hungary and Slovakia, which could help painful as possible for Russia. In the words of Ursula von der Leyen, they wanted Russia to pay a high price for the war in Ukraine. On the other hand, what we understand is that the oil that would go
to try to rescue civilians from the Ukrainian city of Mariupol in the south. A convoy is due in the besieged city today to try to get hundreds of people out of the Azovstal steelworks, which is under attack by Russian forces, completely rebuilt. In particular, of course, those towns near where I am, the capital, Kyiv. Our correspondent James Waterhouse reports now from Makariv, which is a town just outside Kyiv, and a warning: you may find some parts of this report upsetting.
All was in pain.
Ivan's described the people who did this as non-human. His Makariv is still in the middle of its darkest chapter. A few miles away, the heaviest fighting was happening, and being here for the first time really makes you think of the unimaginable things which occurred. The route to recovery is going to be long and difficult, but it's a path people here are determined to do this war. The threat of further attacks hasn't gone away. James Waterhouse, BBC News in Makariv.
Well, as the war rages on into its third month, I've been talking to the Ukrainian Member of Parliament here in Kyiv, Lesia.
Government of Ukraine. Now, Ukraine cannot afford to play the game of fighting a long war. Neither can Europe, neither can the world. And the goal is for Europe and the world to stand solidarily with Ukraine and unite our 1.5 months for all the procedures to be happening. We need them here in Ukraine for the Ukrainian military to be able to be using them already now at the front lines, be it artillery, be it missiles, ammunition, tanks. We need it all.
How do you see an eventual peace settlement? I mean, do you see a sort of compromise where they're allowed to hold on to certain areas, or are you aiming to drive them out of the whole of Ukraine?
It's a very dangerous topic of compromise. narratives which are seeping into this conversation we're even having now, because concessions to Russia essentially mean appeasing the aggressor, and appeasement, as we know very well since 1938, they never work. They just incite more aggression and more. I hope so, and all of Ukraine prays for these people to be brought into safety, and mainly to be brought into safety into Ukraine, not to be deported to Russia, to some kind of filtration camp facilities which exist in Russia. And we're doing
more from our teams in Ukraine, across Ukraine throughout the day. Now, in other news, this year's Asian Games have been cancelled as China battles its largest COVID outbreak. The multidiscipline event was due to take place in Hangzhou in September. No formal interest rate rise in 22 years. Technology stocks led the falls, which were some of the steepest in nearly 2 years. The sell-off came as worries intensified over how rising prices will Paradise, which is living through an economic nightmare. Just bring us up to date. How did Sri Lanka find itself in this crisis? We know the people are angry about it.
Yeah, I mean, Cassie, you just have to look at where I am right now. She's struggling in terms of her 3 children. She's worried how she's going to provide for them as this economic crisis continues to bite. And the only way she feels she can actually do something is by coming down here and protesting. And she is one of the many people here.
Economic decisions can't be taken by politicians, is what Namal Rajapaksa, Sri Lanka's ruling family, part of Sri Lanka's ruling family, has admitted government mistakes, but laying the blame on economists. He was talking to our South Asia editor, Ambarasan Ethirajan.
I was talking to earlier just about that. Now, as you say, my colleague Ambarasan Ethirajan did speak to Namal Rajapaksa, who is the Prime Minister's son, therefore the President's nephew, and he held a position in government until not too long ago when the cabinet them the wrong advice in getting them into this mess. But many people here say that doesn't wash with them. They say that things like decades of borrowing and the Rajapaksas have been in power on and off for many years, but particularly taking out after President Gotabaya was elected in 2019. And also many people here accuse the family of decades of corruption, an allegation that the family denies. So many people say you can say what you want about this, but you need to take responsibility until the 17th of May. So protesters are frustrated that nothing really seems to be moving. And so we go back to that conversation that I had with the teacher here, who says she feels like there's no other way she can do anything but come out here and join the protests. And as you met, many people here still ask that question, what is the way out of this financial mess?
Yeah, Rajini, that teacher there echoing the concerns of so many of those people behind you. Rajini Vardhanathan, worth also watching Rajini's documentary Sri Lanka Paradise Lost. Thank you very much for joining us live. UK local elections results so far show that the party suffered a number of losses.
साहस का एहसास बनके उम्मीदों को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम साथ निभाते हैं कल आज और कल में
Questions you have about the big stories of the day. Reality check. Get the facts straight.
Welcome, you're watching Impact on BBC. And police in the north of England have issued a statement within the past couple of hours saying that they are investigating whether he broke lockdown rules after footage emerged of him drinking a beer with colleagues in April 2021. And this is the opposition Labour Party. So what are they suggesting that they've got?
They're not saying very much other than that they have this new information, and that's why they're reopening the investigation. And just to remind everyone what happened, so on Thursday, after the campaigning, they had some beer and some sandwiches. Now the question is, did that break regulations? The Labour Party's all said no, because it was part of a kind of a work event. Now the police are looking into it. I mean, I should just say very briefly, I mean, if I can indeed, and I'd sum it up in one sentence, which is the voters seem to be rather angry with Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party, but they're not yet in love with Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. And what you don't get from these election results is the sense of Labour as this...
A bit of a lead there.
Yes, but it would be a hung parliament, so it wouldn't be an outright victory for Labour. Obviously, this is not great news for the Conservatives because they won the last election on 43% of the vote and an 80-seat majority. Not quite bad enough to trigger some kind of a leadership challenge to him. But I don't think the Conservative leadership will be at all complacent, because an awful lot of Conservatives are very unhappy with these results, looking at the Conservatives doing very poorly. Honestly, Kasia, I think that might be the result that history remembers above everything else that's happened, and that's because for the first time in the 100 years since Northern Ireland was founded, and remember it was created to have a Protestant majority that was, I mean, will unionists be able to do this? Because you have to kind of understand this is like a real bolt to the sort of psyche of Northern Ireland. The idea that basically a Catholic pro-United Ireland party might emerge as the biggest. It's a lot to take.
The palace said that the decision to only include royals carrying out official public duties was taken after careful consideration. Harry and Meghan quit the monarchy for a new life in the US 2 years ago. Prince Andrew stepped down.
Depression, which could then strengthen into a tropical cyclone. This is expected to drift slowly northwards. Still a few days away, though, from making any sort of landfall, so we'll keep a close eye on that. In the shorter term, heat will once again be becoming climbing once again. Maybe not quite as hot as it was several days ago, but still those temperatures getting back up into the low to mid 40s, and plenty of heat too across Central Asia. 27 degrees in Ashgabat, but 32 the high in Kerala. We'll see showers at times, also affecting the Maldives and Sri Lanka. Further north and east, it does look predominantly dry with lengthy spells of sunshine. Temperatures in Kolkata up to 33 degrees. Could just catch the odd thunderstorm here. Colombo.
कल आज और कल में देश के हर पल में, कल आज और कल में देश के हर पल में, कभी परछाई बनके कभी विश्वास बनके दिल में साहस का है।
1956 से आज तक LIC हर पल आपके साथ।
Nature, all powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control.
And bricks and branches towards the Polish forces.
A week of commemorative events in honour of Archbishop Tutu is well underway all over South Africa.
There's more trouble here in the Netherlands. Small groups of people destroying things in the northern city of Groningen.
The clashes are taking place just a few hundred meters away from where I'm standing now. You can hear the sound of shooting and explosions.
This is a storm that has now claimed at least 14 lives overnight. You had people
To answer any questions you have about the big stories of the day. Reality Check. Get the facts straight.
The government to resign over its handling of the country's economic crisis. Despite the ongoing discontent, the Sri Lankan president insists he and his government will not quit. And Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has admitted his party had a tough night in some areas.
Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. As the Russian war machine tries to inject momentum into its Ukraine offensive, rethink. Well, my guest is Bill Browder, former big-time investor in Russia turned anti-Putin crusader. Why haven't the wheels yet come off the Russian economy? Scale of Western sanctions you were seeing being imposed on Vladimir Putin. I wonder, with a few weeks more knowledge of the way the war is going and the way the Russian economy is going, whether you're a little less euphoric.
with Putin and Ukraine. What I would say is that the sanctions that have been imposed on Putin are more devastating and more unbelievable than any sanctions that have ever been imposed on any country ever. But that's not cut off a number of Russian banks from SWIFT. That's sort of the savings of Putin. But every day he earns $1 billion from the sale of oil and gas to Germany, Italy, Austria, etc. And every
more than perhaps I would have asked for based on what I thought the West was capable of. And you seem there to be particularly focused on the measures taken against a host of so-called oligarchs, these huge multi-billionaire businessmen who have had...
Financially, you've got to sanction the oligarchs.
Can you prove that, by the way?
Well, you can't prove it to a court standard for one simple reason, because the reason Putin doesn't hold money in his own name is he doesn't want anyone to be able to prove that he's rich. And so he has what
take place. How do you know that they do indeed result in vast amounts of Putin money being held in the name of other people?
Well, a lot of different leaks have come out since all these agreements were made. So, for example, there's a famous $2 billion by Russian state banks and Russian oligarchs. Why would Russian state banks and oligarchs pay a cellist $2 billion? The next richest cellist is Yo-Yo Ma, who's worth like $15 million. The reason is because he's Putin's best friend from China. Racketeering, and you don't have to have the same level of evidence. Same thing is true here.
So then the question is just how far do these sanctions on individuals need to go before you are in effect truly punishing Vladimir Putin, and the need to find many, many more individuals?
Yeah, so there's two issues. One is that if you look at the list of oligarchs, there's 118 people on the Forbes list. Only 35 of them have been sanctioned by either the US, UK, EU. In an oligarch, you have to do the whole constellation around them. There's a whole cat and mouse game that goes on that has to go on.
So I'm fascinated by the way you see this playing out. For example, in recent days, sanctions have been expanded to capture...
For example, Abramovich, he has a whole bunch of people around him who have become very wealthy very quickly. They've all been sanctioned as well by the UK.
So you say that these people matter because they're holding a lot of Putin money. But even if Putin finds that that money has in effect been... What difference would that make? I spoke very recently to a man you know well, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, former head of Yukos energy company in Russia, now a long-term anti-Putin campaigner just like yourself. And he says that
sanctioning them, and in effect Vladimir Putin himself, is not to change his mind. He's not going to change his mind. He might have, by the way, if we had done it in advance, if we had done it 10 years ago, but he's not going to change his mind right now. The purpose of sanctioning him is to say, we don't want you to have...
You said to me at the beginning of this conversation, the key money, the money that really matters, is going in day after day, week after week, from the energy resources that Russia sells, not least to Europe and other Western allies. Criticised early on in this conversation, Germany is now saying it is ready to contemplate.
But then we still have the gas, and the gas is huge, and gas is much harder to replace. There's pipes that come in, the infrastructure is not. Grind him down, wear him out, and make sure he doesn't have enough money to do all the things that he wants to do.
Do you think your financial and economic analysis of Putin and his vulnerabilities is somewhat Western-centric? Because outside of your analysis, the key here to Putin's economic future and his ability to continue to fight the war, and I'm suggesting to you that maybe there are factors at work here, looking toward Beijing, toward Asia, India, the Gulf, that you're not counting on.
Want to pay the price that they would ultimately pay, even if the governments don't get involved, just the consumers.
Right, but listening to you, it still sounds like a world entirely dominated by the Western economies led by the United States. You listen to Sergei Lavrov, and he says what they don't understand in the West is what is happening.
Nobody wants to be without access to our markets. We hold the keys to this whole thing.
Do we?
We absolutely do. China doesn't want to mess up their export markets. And for India gets like a tiny bit of Russian oil right now.
Economically for much more than a decade. You've, as it happens, just got a new book out, Freezing Order, which is about some of your experiences taking on Putin. But this goes back to a decision you took in the late who can impose some order here on this chaotic capitalism. And you thought Vladimir Putin was the guy. You even wrote a rather well-known Times article in which you said, you know, this authoritarian figure is just what Russia needs.
Well, I'd hoped he was. We all.
How much of it do you have?
I was totally wrong. We were all totally wrong. George Bush was totally wrong. Tony Blair was totally wrong. Everybody was totally wrong about Vladimir Putin. It took me a little less time than most people in the West to understand that he's truly evil and we need to fight him. But
Magnitsky, he ended up, because of the digging he was doing into corruption, some of it on your behalf, he ended up in police detention and he ended up murdered, I believe, in 2009. How much of what you are doing to this very day
has driven me from then until now to get justice for Sergei Magnitsky and eventually justice for other victims, but it's been the primary driving force of my life.
I mean, obviously, it's a statement of the complete obvious. You can't get justice for Sergei Magnitsky. I mean, he's gone, his family have to live with that. In retrospect, were there things you could have done differently that might have prevented the loss of his life?
I think I could have not gone to Russia in the first place, but once we were being victimized and persecuted by the Putin regime.
2022, with you telling me about the web of financial networks that Putin has built, not least in the last 10 years, the Magnitsky acts across the world have not succeeded in rooting out.
For tying up their financial affairs in a knot to stop them from having access to their money. It's a quite powerful tool, I think.
Well, do you though? Because I mean, there are other crusaders, if I can put it that way. All of those hidden monies are somehow going to be found.
I don't think they'll be found, but just think about this for a second. The UK has the Magnitsky Act. The UK has a sanctions regime. And what happens when the UK imposes these sanctions? It's not nothing.
No, I guess the Russians would say that's not nothing either, because they are extraordinarily keen to get their hands on you, which I guess is a sign that they care about what you have campaigned for and, in a sense, delivered with the Magnitsky Act over the last decade.
Putin has been uttering my name everywhere he has a chance.
He wanted to do a trade, actually, with Donald Trump, didn't he? He suggested that the Americans might engineer somehow to swap you for people that the Americans wanted to interview in connection with the election interference.
To have the most important man in the free world, the President of the United States, agreeing to that was absolutely horrifying, which comes back to, if the Magnitsky Act isn't effective, then why has Putin been uttering my name? And he doesn't ever mention the name of his enemies. Almost sort
of hiding money in offshore centres. Your own companies have done that in the British Virgin Islands, for example. You have done tax runarounds in Russia, which I would imagine you think the oligarchs use, and perhaps you criticise them for, but you've done it yourself. You are
fully above board, and the tax allegations...
Oh, I carefully didn't say it was illegal, but I did say that you use practices which the oligarchs use.
I don't. I report everything fully and transparently. And secondly, all these allegations of tax evasion have been disproved by...
Certainly in financial and economic terms, you understand the system, albeit you haven't lived in Russia for quite some time. Where does this end? Militarily, one could argue it's not going well for Putin right now. But also one could argue there is no...
on because Putin, he can't afford to back down. He can't afford to have a peace treaty. He can't afford to compromise. And Zelensky and the Ukrainians are not going to give up their territory, and so this thing will carry on.
So you've described a Putin who is increasingly painted into a
yard convict. He needs to show everybody how ruthless he is. And if you let him run free, he will eviscerate anybody standing in his way. It's not like a humiliated Putin is more dangerous than an unhumiliated Putin. Putin is just a bad guy.
Completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist since 1933. Barso se sarso.
Hello there. At the moment, various frontal systems pushing in from the Pacific. There'll be various bouts of rain and mountain snow out towards the west. Meanwhile, this swirl of cloud has been bringing some severe thunderstorms and tornadoes across southern areas. the area of low pressure responsible to occur. And down towards the south, we see some very heavy rain setting up across southern portions of Chile. In fact, the rain here will continue for a few days, so that could cause some problems. We look ahead to Saturday in Europe with low pressure swirling across the central Mediterranean. Areas of lifted dust and sand around. The satellite picture reveals a lot of cloud in the Bay of Bengal. We are keeping a close eye on this area because it looks like we could spin up a tropical depression, maybe eventually a tropical cyclone over the next few days. But for the time being, just swirling around over the next couple of days. Further east, the weather is relatively quiet at the moment, certainly cooler than it has been over recent days in northern China. Temperatures in Beijing on Saturday only getting up to 20 degrees. One weather system threatening to bring some rain into New Zealand.
In Europe over a proposed EU ban on Russian oil. The Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban compares it to dropping an atomic bomb on his country's economy.
The sanctions that we have so far introduced have caused more trouble for the European economy than for the
night for his Conservative Party as it loses control of some crucial councils in London. And all is not doomed for the world's most endangered sea mammal. There's only 10 vaquita porpoises left in the wild, but a DNA study suggests they can still avoid extinction. Here he is speaking on Hungarian state radio. Let's get the very latest with Ben Brown in Kiev.
Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban has accused the head of the European Commission of undermining EU unity on sanctions.
First of former proposals. I cannot do anything else but send them back to be reworked. The sanctions that we have so far introduced have caused more trouble for the European economy than for the Russian one. I do not consider them a good tool anyway.
Are negotiating over this at the moment. There are possible areas where they say they could perhaps have a longer transition period for Hungary, also more money for investment in cruise to whether there will be this oil embargo on Russian oil.
And I suppose the danger is, from the EU's point of view, from Ursula von der Leyen's point of view, is watering down this proposed ban on Russian oil.
Fraction of the oil that is currently coming to the European Union, that it is something perhaps that the EU could live with. And compromise, of course, is always the name of the game here, trying to find consensus between all the different needs.
The city of Mariupol in the south. A convoy is due in the besieged city today to try to get hundreds of people out of the Azovstal steelworks, which is under attack by Russian forces. It's thought there may be around 200 civilian towns near where I am, the capital, Kyiv. Our correspondent James Waterhouse reports now from Makariv, which is a town just outside Kyiv, and a warning, you may find some parts of this report upsetting.
Makariv isn't a big place itself, at the heart of the battle for the capital. It's been a month since the invaders pulled back. The effects of what they did are only starting to be felt. Ivan's worked in this uniform factory for 30 years. Ivan's described the people who did this as non-human. His Makariv is still in the middle of its darkest chapter. A few miles away, we're taken here to the body of a man fouling. This week's seen the market come back. I reported on towns like Makariv for weeks. We knew this was where some of the heaviest fighting was happening, and being here for the first time really makes you think of the
It's hard now, but we carry on.
And so does this war. The threat of further attacks hasn't gone away. James Waterhouse, BBC News in Makariv.
We will, of course, update you throughout the...
Activists who want the government to resign. Protests have been going on for weeks in the island nation over the Sri Lanka's worst ever economic and cost of living crisis. Well, it all comes as a prominent member of Sri Lanka's governing party says the administration could have been better prepared for the current 20.
Well, the government knew, even before the campaign, that there was a huge number of repayment that we had to make. But that is something that anyone who comes into power has to do it. But the COVID pandemic situation was not taken into consideration. So all of a sudden, and the finance ministry and try to look at restructuring the system.
Everyone accepts pandemic was unexpected, but even then, for example, some economists point out a huge tax relief given by the government as soon as it came to power.
Into the economy. So intention was that, but unfortunately it did not go the way he thought it will go. So even after the first budget, the second budget, I believe we would have reversed it, but unfortunately they didn't.
I was here and no other option than to go to the IMF. And then the rupee should have been floated because people were sending money from abroad through illegal channels. But why the government did not listen to those advice?
It also goes back to the officials who take decisions, because economic by the current finance minister in parliament, that certain officials gave wrong advice.
Many people have lost their jobs. People whom I spoke to, they say instead of 3 meals, they are having 2 because of the escalating costs. What would you tell them?
See, I mean, it also must be there, but at the same time, we also must look at way forward. But at the moment, I don't see any politician in parliament, including the opposition, is talking about the way forward. But at the same time, people who are responsible for taking decisions now has to look at the future and take
Rest of the popularity of Boris Johnson's government. The main opposition Labour Party is celebrating some modest gains, especially in London. But there could be trouble ahead for the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. Police are now investigating whether he broke COVID lockdown rules after footage emerged of him drinking.
Boris Johnson and the Conservatives are in trouble, but the voters are not yet in love with Keir Starmer and the main opposition Labour Party and don't yet clearly see him as an alternative to put into Downing Street right away. 2016 referendum, while Labour has done well in areas that voted Remain. And so you see this sort of polarisation of the UK, a bit like you've seen in the United States, with, you know, essentially Remain voters tend to be in big cities, are graduates, are young, and actually believe in the existence of Northern Ireland. That's Sinn Féin, which thinks that there should be a united Ireland. For the first time in 100 years of the history of Northern Ireland, it looks like a party that believes in a united Ireland will emerge as the biggest. And we could get
winning support despite the huge challenges that he's faced recently.
Yes, and there was a view that these elections were going to be a sort of a test of his popularity, and if they were really, really bad, there could be a challenge to his leadership. I think the view, I'm worried about the sort of huge economic headwinds that Britain faces.
Scotland also, of course, we're still waiting for those results. Again, not looking great for the Conservatives at the moment, but Rob, thanks very much indeed. We'll be back with Rob, of course, in the coming hours. Do stay with us here on BBC World News. Much more to come.
A force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm, nurturing and loving. P-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods.
Jubilee celebrations coming up next month. The palace said the decision to only invite royals carrying out official public duties was taken after careful consideration. Well, we're joined now by royal correspondent Sarah Campbell to tell us more. Sarah, and we have heard confirmation
at the top. It's kind of the big annual family photo, obviously before COVID. There hasn't been one since COVID. But it was announced today, it was made clear that the Queen had decided that it would be limited this year to only those members of the royal family who've been undertaking official duties to be attending Jubilee events. Their spokesperson has said that they are excited and honoured to attend the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations this June with their children. So the significance of that being that they moved to California 2 years ago.
This birthday today,
and it's Archie's, it's Archie's birthday today. So yes,
birthday, Archie.
Exactly. So it will be interesting to see which events they attend. They will have been invited. So perhaps if I take you through the list of events. Platinum party at the Palace on the Saturday. Sunday the 5th of June there's the big Jubilee lunch, so there's something like 60,000 people have already registered to hold some sort of street party across the UK. and then there's the pageant in central London. So plenty of opportunity for the Sussex Queen particularly will have had to really think about how this was going to affect, because I think there's no doubt that had Prince Andrew been on the balcony, there would have been questions about that. And the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, there would have been questions, but for different reasons, because they've been out of the country for such at some of these events over the course of the Jubilee weekend. But
that's going to cause a lot of concern and criticism, isn't it?
Well, I think there will be questions asked, as there were when he attended the Thanksgiving service for Prince Philip, his father. But
healthy and able to breed despite their low genetic diversity. Now, researchers in the US say that if the remaining population can avoid being killed as by catch by fishing gillets, then there is a chance that the species. Are they all being tracked? How do we know that the numbers are so low? And that does sound dangerously low.
It is a very low number. They are not being individually tracked, but the population size is estimated based on essentially there are only 10 left. It's been very difficult to prevent this bycatch mortality, even though the vaquitas are officially protected by gill net bans. The fishing is just so lucrative, and we ran computer models of what the population, what could happen to the population over the next 50 years if the gill net fishing pressure ceases or is almost entirely eliminated. And those costs were entirely or almost entirely removed, that the vaquitas could recover on their own during the next 50 years.
Are the nets being recovered? And another sort of more practical question, I mean, how long is the gestation period if they...
Vaquitas. So it's possible to see reproduction, on an annual rate. And even though there are only 10 individuals left, the vaquitas are managing to find one another and breed successfully.
3 NASA astronauts and 1 astronaut from the European Space Agency. Do you join us again? This is BBC World News.
Hello, we're keeping a close eye on developments in the Bay of Bengal at the moment. A mass of clouds swirling with the potential that we are going to spin up a tropical depression, which could then strengthen into a tropical cyclone. This is expected several days ago, but still those temperatures getting back up into the low to mid 40s, and plenty of heat too across Central Asia. 27 degrees in Ashgabat, but 32 the high in Tashkent. Kabul pretty close to 30 Celsius. The heat building once again across Pakistan. Lengthy spells of sunshine. Temperatures in Kolkata up to 33 degrees. Could just catch the odd thunderstorm here. Colombo certainly will see further showers. Temperatures in Islamabad getting up back into the 40s, 42 degrees by Tuesday and Wednesday.
A force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm, nurturing and loving. P-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only
देश के हर पल कभी परछाई बनके कभी विश्वास बनके दिल में साहस का एहसास बनके उम्मीदों को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं
Groningen. The clashes are taking place just a few hundred meters away from where I'm standing now. You can hear the sound of shooting and explosions.
This is a storm that has now claimed at least 14 lives overnight. You had people...
Hello and namaste, I'm Devina Gupta and this is Work Life India on the BBC from Delhi, and I'm enjoying a ride in an electric three-wheeler called an auto here. And this vehicle is also part of the ambitious plan of and also installing public charging facilities. But it's not without a bumper, because at least in last 2 months there have been over 20 such incidents where two-wheelers or electric scooters have caught fire. Even as the investors impacted the growth of electrical vehicles market in India? Let's find out.
I sometimes feel scared, but now that I have bought it, I can't do anything. If I start talking about these issues, the passengers won't sit inside.
I think government should work on that, and government should make certain moves to, make these batteries and make the infrastructure better, and for the Indian environment particularly.
Well, we are back in the studio with that, and I must tell you that several Indian companies have recalled their vehicles. Have with us first up Kedar Suman. He is the Chief Technology Officer with e-Bike Go, which is one of India's largest electric two-wheeler mobility platform that offers e-bikes on rent, and they have over 2,000 plus e-bikes in their fleet. So welcome, Kedar, your joys.
Of course.
But an electric car?
I'm looking forward to buying one very soon.
All right. Let me get our third guest in, Rajiv Kumar. He's an economist and also he is former vice chairman.
But, once you are, once you are comfortable with that, really it's a great experience in the electric car.
But looking at the safety concerns right now for electric two-wheelers or the electric scooters, is
the three-wheelers and some two-wheelers, and especially those which travel at the less than 25 kilometers an hour, are not not even required to be licensed, and they have no such systems, and therefore that's where
Rajiv has pointed out that for two-wheelers, manufacturers and distributors of electric vehicles, which are two-wheelers, right now regulations are not as stringent as a four-wheeler electric car manufacturer, and that's where the risk.
To ensure good technology, work with good suppliers, but at the same time, as Rajiv said and you just mentioned, there is a category of low-speed scooters which exists in India, where the regulation is not stringent enough.
The battery management system, but coming to you, Kedar, then the billion-dollar question that everybody seems to be asking is, why is it that these electric scooters are catching fire? I understand that from Sulajja and Rajiv that there are quality controls.
And to the automobile manufacturer or seller, and to a large extent what has happened so far is people who are selling electric two-wheelers have more primary background in trading, and many Indian weather is perhaps a tiny reason. Some design changes can be done, but that is not the primary reason.
Okay.
That is one of the contributors, but not the primary contributor.
Okay, Rajiv, you want to come in? What's the reason? Yes.
I just wanted to say that the reason, but this is not being done in India. The bottom line is that the cells which are being imported are not being put through the quality tests that are required, but the industry and the firms are trying that, and the larger company, bulging, etc., does not happen. So, again, and that the government has come up with the production-linked incentive scheme for lithium-ion batteries, and soon we shall have start production of these batteries and hopefully their cells within India.
Of semiconductors, a shortage of palladium, nickel, the raw materials because of geopolitical factors as well. Even if India gets and ramps up its own battery production right now, as an electric vehicle manufacturer, what are the challenges that you face?
We are trying to make vehicles with good quality, with good batteries. And battery is the heart of the electric vehicle. So there are companies in the market who are trying to take shortcuts. It's like you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, right? So if you know that good quality products and standards are introduced towards the long-term development of the EV market in a very safe way.
But for now, is it also shaking confidence of consumers? So Rajiv, coming to you then, the government has...
Industry is a growth industry which will drive India's manufacturing growth forward as well. Here is an industry where 80% of the two-wheelers, turning to electric vehicle confidence, if that has been. But if you look at the waiting list for the electric vehicles, especially the four-wheelers and now also the two-wheelers, you recognize that the consumers have already voted with their purse on the electric vehicles. This is the future, the next 5 to 7 years, and we will produce enough lithium through recycling, so that we won't be dependent on imports at all. And this is a fact. They're also putting up a plant in the US for a similar thing. So I think these are teething trouble.
People who are hiring your vehicles, asking you these questions. Is there somewhere down the line this fear among the consumers, at least those whom you are dealing with?
We see some concern, however, obviously when people see the to be temporary. So to a large extent, I agree with what Rajiv said here, that long term, I think the trend is set. It is not reversing because of these issues. There are a few things that we try to do at e-Bike Go, like some problems that are there is this regulations, the government regulations are in place, However, there are pockets available where you could bypass these regulations or, expedite a few things. So I think better mechanisms and stringent mechanisms of enforcing electric revolution, they have more maturity, or it's the products that are being sold there, they have done better quality assurance. Also, even today, a large number of electric two-wheelers sold in China have the lead acid battery, just because the ecosystem is so well developed there and the cost efficiency is there. So that factor is also there. And we hear from our sources that there are occasional incidences of battery fires even happening there. It's just that,
Before that, one of the suggestions in the draft policy of India's think tank Niti Aayog has been the battery swap service model. That means even the finance minister of India talked about this, that the users actually don't challenge to charge electric vehicles. How realistic does this plan seem to be?
So I'm personally extremely bullish on the prospects of battery swapping in India, especially for electric two-wheelers and three-wheelers, long time and in the long run. Secondly, the batteries are charged then in a controlled environment, and the battery swapping infrastructure manufacturer or company is taking care of the battery quality, battery charging, battery replacement. Many startups working in this area. And battery swapping has two other advantages, is that you don't need a lot of space because you can have a stackable battery swapping station. So it doesn't need a lot of horizontal space. And the batteries are swapped in just 2 minutes. So even for the customer, there's a lot of convenience.
But here's a question as a consumer, Rajiv, because would it not also add to the hassle?
Not at all. The battery size, is probably less than a kilogram or something like that, or maybe a couple, kilograms. So therefore, you just have to take this battery out of the box and then just give it to the person and then put the next battery in. It's not a hassle at all. But for the buses and for cars, especially for cars, because buses will run on green hydrogen month or annual basis, to getting batteries, in place rather than having to buy the battery as a part of the vehicle, which, as Sulija said, really does push up the cost by at least 40 to 50%.
One of the safer options, absolutely. But let me come to you,
first, and you can ask this question specifically when you are purchasing an electric vehicle. And those questions are like, what kind of battery chemistry it is, what kind of battery management system you have, what are the regulations you're following, and make sure they can buy it from a reputed manufacturer. And if they see anything suspicious, like battery heating more than a reasonable slight increase in temperature when they are charging, then they should immediately
see that are involved in this technology.
Right. I think that at this point it is a problem. I think several people, there are many user groups in various cities. There are WhatsApp groups.
Transparency with more data sharing and a ready service available after their sales.
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, manufacturers must take responsibility for quality and safety, take it very seriously. That's extremely great responsibility. And they have to not just meet, but exceed the basic standards that are expected, because we're here to build a long-term business. And as Rajiv said, the future for e-mobility is extremely bright. We can expect a disruptive conversion of...
Thank you. Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you. Take care. All right, so this panel feels that while the electric vehicles market is growing in India, stronger action is needed to address safety concerns emerging in the two-wheeler segment. Do tell us your thoughts and share your experiences.
In our connected world, all news is international. So, for in-depth analysis,
the impact on Europe and the rest of the world would be devastating.
कल आज और कल में देश के हर पल में, कल आज और कल में देश के हर पल में, कभी परछाई बनके, कभी विश्वास बनके, दिल में साहस आज और कल में रहते हैं, देश के हर पल में रहते हैं।
1956 से आज तक LIC हर पल आपके साथ।
We have seen some very stormy conditions across some southern parts over the last couple of days. Severe thunderstorms, large hail, squally gusty winds and some reports of tornadoes. Now this whole weather system is continuing to journey eastwards, so through Friday night and through the weekend, 200 millimetres of rain or more in some spots, which is likely to cause flooding and landslides. To Europe on Sunday, low pressure circulating still across the central Mediterranean, bringing some showers and thunderstorms to the line. Cloud in the Bay of Bengal. We're watching this closely because it looks like we could spin up a tropical depression and potentially a tropical cyclone drifting its way northwards. So we will keep a close watch on that one for you. In the shorter term, some showers across southern portions of India, New Zealand. Bye for now.
Hello, I'm Ross Atkins with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines for Ukraine. Let's look at some of the international reaction. Tell us what you...
Incredibly alluring and attractive place to go. I was really excited to visit because every coastline in the world will be changed by what happens in that part of Antarctica. So it's all the more important that we get there with our cameras and show people the changes that are taking. It has taken years of preparation to get the scientists out here. And because of all the delays, what I didn't expect was to be camping on ice for 5 weeks. It's shocking and, you know, we should all be upset by what's happening here. This is a really
News. I'm Geeta Gurumurthy. Our top stories. Divisions in Europe over banning Russian oil. The Hungarian Prime Minister says it would be like dropping an atomic bomb on his country's economy.
The sanctions that we have so far introduced have caused more trouble for the
ever economic crisis. And all is not doomed for the world's most endangered sea mammal. A DNA study says vaquita porpoises can still avoid extinction. A total embargo on Russian oil. Hungary, which is heavily dependent on Russian crude, has said it will veto the plans. It comes as Ukrainian forces accuse Russia of firing during the evacuation of civilians from the besieged Mariupol steelworks. Ben Brown.
Country's economy. He's been speaking to Hungarian state radio.
We are interested in cooperation and dialogue with the EU, but that is only possible if they take our interests into account. It is not acceptable that they ignore us and make proposals. I cannot do anything else but send them back to be reworked. The sanctions that we have so far introduced have caused more trouble for the European economy than for the Russian one. I do not consider them a good tool anyway.
Words there from the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. It's not clear exactly how that translates when it comes to negotiating the nitty-gritty of this oil embargo sanctions package, oil embargo on Russian oil.
And I suppose the danger is, from the EU's point of view, from Ursula von der Leyen's point of view, is watering down this proposed ban on Russian oil.
Yes, I think Hungary and Slovakia represents quite a small fraction of the oil that is currently coming to the European Union, that it is something perhaps that the EU could live with. And compromise, of course, is always the name of the game here, trying to find consensus. Starting to think about is an embargo on all Russian energy, including gas, and that is a much, much more difficult prospect for the EU.
That's Bethany Bell reporting. Well, the United Nations says a third operation, including some 20 children, 20 to 30 children, who are still in the underground bunkers and tunnels of the Azovstal steel plant. Well, elsewhere in Ukraine, where Russian forces have retreated, whole town Makariv, which is a town just outside Kyiv, and a warning, you may find some parts of this report upsetting.
Makariv isn't a big place. 10,000 people live here, but the Russians saw it as an important route to Kyiv. This town found itself at the heart of the battle for the capital. It's been a month since the invaders pulled back, The effects of what they did are only starting to be felt.
All was in pain.
Ivan's described the people who did this as non-human. His Makariv is still in the middle of its darkest chapter. A few miles off scene, the market come back. I reported on towns like Makariv for weeks. We knew this was where some of the heaviest fighting was happening, and being here for the first time really makes you think of the unimaginable things as this war. The threat of further attacks hasn't gone away. James Waterhouse, BBC News in Makariv.
We will, of course, update you throughout the day here on BBC News with the latest from Mariupol on that evacuation operation.
He's at Security College at King's College in London. Thanks very much for joining us. In terms of whether any nation follows war crimes rules in conflicts around the world, does any nation...
These kinds of lawyers.
Yeah, and both sides have been accused in this case of using cluster bombs, haven't they, both Ukrainians and Russian forces?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you know, these accusations, you know, and the kind of deliberate nature of these crimes, I think, is fairly clear.
And in terms of, obviously, the focus for everyone is to try to stop this military conflict as fast as possible. What do you see?
Right, that everyone wants the war to finish as soon as possible, especially if you're Ukrainian. You know, I think it's that kind of talk which they find quite disturbing and concerning because, you know, what you've got Russia perhaps mobilizing in time for the anniversary of the Great Patriotic War, the Second World War on the 9th of May. Obviously, we don't know what is planned, but it would seem surprising if Russia were to suddenly declare a full-out mobilization, because that would be very difficult. I think at this stage, already Putin has kind of more or less had to promise that he won't use any conscripts because that would be very unpopular with the Russian people. And also that kind of mobilization, a general mobilization, would take a long time. You know, it can't happen overnight. And also mobilization would then imply that they're moving from the so-called special military operation to an all-out war.
In terms of what both sides could resolve on at any future point, is it clear what Ukraine would accept?
Well, I attended that talk. Okay, at the same time, he also said there are still bridges, figuratively speaking, you know, between Russia and Ukraine. So, you know, we don't know exactly what concessions they might make on Donbass and Luhansk. But the only thing is that obviously it's a question of whether we're talking about, you know, the areas that were occupied by Russia until the invasion this year, or are we talking about, you know, a kind of...
The girlfriend of a Belarusian opposition blogger has been sentenced to 6 years in jail and ordered to pay nearly $50,000 in compensation. Sofia Sapega was found guilty of charges including inciting social discord and illegally collecting personal information. Shops and businesses are closed in several places in Sri Lanka as part of a shutdown called by trade unions and activists who want the government to resign. Protests have been going on for weeks in the island nation over Sri Lanka's worst ever economic crisis and cost of living crisis.
Here. Now talk to almost any protester here and they will say that they will continue protesting until Sri Lanka's government quits. In particular, they want President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his brother, the Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, to quit. Yes. Now tonight, President Rajapaksa met with his cabinet. We are hearing reports of some tensions between the two brothers, and earlier this week there were reports that the Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa might step down, but as of now both President's motion was the election of the Deputy Speaker earlier this week. Now he quit. Deputy Speaker has the backing of the government, even though he's from a different party. He quit, then he was re-elected again, and that's where some observers thought, well, maybe the confusing scenario where he quit, then he was re-elected, now he's quit again. And in many ways, that crisis of confusion and uncertainty sums up what's going on here in Sri Lanka, with millions of families unsure where they're going to...
Vaidyanathan there talking to us from Sri Lanka. Do stay with us here on BBC World News, much more ahead. A study says the world's rarest sea mammal still has a chance of survival, despite there being only about 10 of them left in the wild.
To answer any questions you have about the big stories of the day. Reality Check. Get the facts straight.
Political correspondent Rob Watson for his assessment of what's going on.
I think we'd sum it up as the voters being angry with Boris Johnson and the Conservatives. The Conservatives are in trouble, but the voters are not yet in love with Keir Starmer and the main opposition in areas that voted Leave in the 2016 referendum, while Labour has done well in areas that voted Remain. And so you see this sort of polarisation of the UK, a bit like you've seen in the United States, with, you know, essentially Remain voters tend...
Consequence potentially is what's coming in Northern Ireland.
Well, it's Brexit, and something, in a way, can you believe this, something even more fundamental than Brexit, if that's possible. And yeah, absolutely. So all the projections suggest that a party that doesn't actually believe in Ireland, it looks like a party that believes in a united Ireland will emerge as the biggest. And we could get on to Brexit at some point, later in the week, later in the day, later in this interview, but just that in itself, it's a huge psychological moment. You know, this part of Britain sense that Boris Johnson is out of the woods. Lots of Conservatives are very unhappy about how badly the party has done here in London and in the south of England. They're worried about more fines, and they're worried about the sort of huge economic headwinds that Britain faces.
Rob has sparked a little hope because individual vaquita porpoises do remain healthy and they are able to breed despite that very low level of diversity. Well, researchers in the US say that if the remaining population can avoid being killed by...
Estimated based on essentially acoustic data, they're very shy species and very hard to spot in the wild. So researchers go out into the area and use acoustic methods to try to estimate how many individuals are left. With gill nets, which are actually targeting other species, but the vaquitas are getting caught in those nets and perishing. So that's why there are only 10 left. It's been very difficult to prevent that fishing pressure ceases or is almost entirely eliminated. And those computational models involve many biological parameters, including the genetic diversity of the species. And what they show cover on their own during the next 50 years.
Are the nets being recovered? And another sort of more practical question, I mean, how long is the gestation period when they do breed? You know, can they increase the population quickly or does it take time?
So it's possible to see reproduction, you know, on an annual rate. And even though there are only 10 individuals left, the vaquitas are managing to find one another and breed successfully.
Come from the US to the UK for those celebrations. We are back soon. This is BBC World.
Hello, we're keeping a close eye on developments in the Bay of Bengal at the moment. A mass of clouds ago, but still those temperatures getting back up into the low to mid 40s and plenty of heat too across Central Asia. 27 degrees in Ashgabat, but 32 the high in Tashkent. Kabul pretty close to 30 Celsius. The heat building once again across Pakistan into
दिल में साहस का एहसास बनके उम्मीदों को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम साथ निभाते हैं
With nature, she is warm, nurturing and loving. B-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we
The cost of war is measured in billions, so how can Ukraine keep going despite the immense damage it's suffering? Its finance...
Are closed in several places in Sri Lanka as part of a shutdown called by trade unions and activists. They want the government to resign over its handling of the country's economic crisis. There's been a huge explosion at a hotel in the Cuban capital, Havana. The explosion destroyed the facade.
Now on BBC World News, veteran World Affairs editor John Simpson talks to BBC correspondents, going beyond the headlines for expert analysis of the week's major international news stories. Unspun World.
Hello and welcome back to Unspun World after our brief break. Could it be that Russia and Ukraine are getting closer to the decisive moment in the war where it could escalate? And the accurate up to now in forecasting President Putin's actions suggests he could soon declare war formally on Ukraine and call for a so-called independence vote in the pro-Russian areas of eastern Ukraine.
Pressure as if they're losing.
How seriously are the sanctions on Russia affecting its thinking? The answer may surprise you.
Russia's income from selling fossil fuels have doubled in the last 2 months because of that acceleration.
Первый готов, наведен.
It's often hard to sort out fact from propaganda or wishful thinking. In Russia's war on Ukraine at the moment, they're also making some advances in eastern Ukraine. And what are we to make of the blood-curdling threats on Russian state television that Russia could drop a nuclear bomb off the coast of...
They haven't got the upper hand suggests that they are not winning, and therefore in many people's eyes psychologically they will feel under pressure as if they're losing, even if it's basically turning into a war of attrition between the two sides, which could end up deadlocked. And the link in his mind between celebrating victory in the Second World War and celebrating victory against what he of course says is a kind of Nazi regime in Ukraine would have been clear, and he could have celebrated that. But that's not going to be the case. There's no way that... And to use it as a moment to talk about mobilization and to switch from the language of a special military operation to one of war, and to one in which they are talking about mobilizing and getting the population behind an actual war, not succeeding on the battlefield as they hoped. And one of the only ways they have of, if you like, drawing domestic support together is to remind people that they have these nuclear weapons and that they could use them. And they hope that they can act as a deterrent. There is a Russian strategy to talk about nuclear weapons. I think some of the things you see on Russian TV, the maps and showing how London could be destroyed and how quickly, a lot of that is rhetoric. But there is something behind it which is real. And I think the question for Western...
but to make sure that Russia will never be able to do this again, or certainly in the sort of medium term, that it'll be actively defeated.
There was a very interesting statement from Lloyd Austin, the US Defense Secretary, a week or so, was, if you like, upping the stakes of this conflict. And we've seen some response in Russia, which is saying, well, we are now fighting the West. It's a proxy war. This isn't about Ukraine. This is about Russia and the West.
The Russians are right, though, aren't they? I mean, this is...
The NATO weapons is overt. They're not hiding it. It's considerable. It is making a huge difference on the battlefield in killing Russian soldiers. But NATO is not fighting directly. And I suppose that is the line which everyone is looking for, is will that line be held, that there is no direct engagement between NATO and Russia?
Major conflicts always have consequences nobody thought about. Supplies, because Ukraine is an immensely important grain producer, and fertilizer prices as well. The shortages are already causing problems right across the globe. So what is the worldwide impact?
But around the globe as well. So what we're seeing happening in the last 2 months is likely to have an impact not just on trade now and in recent weeks, but perhaps in years to come as well. And we're seeing elevated prices for a lot of things, some disruptions in terms of readily recognisable alternatives to that. And we're talking about people towards the lower end of the income scale, aren't we? So when we talk about that kind of impact, we're talking about a greater risk of social unrest. So we are talking about a fundamental problem that Russia would term as unfriendly. No, I think that those days have now gone, and we will be looking for alternative sources of fossil fuels, or perhaps putting more emphasis in looking into substitutes and, you know, more carbon-friendly alternatives. UK, for example, turning their back on Russian oil. How much of a difference does it actually make to Russia? Not that much. We've heard some estimates say that India, for example, has bought more oil from Russia, taking advantage of a bit of a discount situation than it had.
But there are other problems for Russia in terms of trade, aren't there?
Already, it is pretty much in recession. We're already seeing prices climbing quite sharply because of what we've been seeing happening with sanctions as well. We've had a number of big employers pulling out of Russia, of course. Thought we were getting back to life as normal. 2022 was meant to be the year of full recovery. Instead of which, we are talking, particularly for countries which are very close to Ukraine, we are talking about the possibility of recession once again. But it's expected to be shallow.
They wipe out all memory of the previous ones. With the war in Ukraine, COVID seems like something from the distant past. But there's one overwhelming crisis that we ignore at our peril. Climate editor.
It's the issue that's going to determine, you know, how our descendants live, not just for the next 50 or 100 years, but for literally thousands of years to come. And we're at a moment now where the decisions we make now really will be consequential. We really must, the world are aware that this is a huge problem that's going to affect their communities. We've got that, you know, classic issue with climate change, that it's a long-term, very serious long-term impact, but it's quite slow. So in the normal electoral cycle, it's quite easy for import a bit of coal to cover us through, and you probably think we're just papering over a crack.
But that is already happening, isn't it? I mean, coal, countries are using coal where they were starting to wean themselves off it.
There's definitely, yeah, and even in Britain, for example, interplay all the coal-fired power stations they can to meet this huge new demand for electricity. But it could go the other way as well. There definitely will be countries around the world that look at what's happening in Ukraine and say, we need energy independence, and that means, you know, renewable.
Incredibly worrying the other day, which said that the next great dying, the killing off of large numbers of species, isn't just something in the future, it's actually
in the next few decades, unless really serious remedial action is taken, but on climate change, but also on all the other drivers of biodiversity loss, which are kind of deforestation, the margin of agriculture moving, pollution, all those kind of things are causing away from that. Yes, some of our, you know, a proportion here in Britain, quite a high proportion, 45–50% of our energy at the moment is coming from renewables, of our electricity, but not from our total energy. So we still heat our homes with gas. Most of our vehicles are still powered by petrol.
Central Chinese city of Wuhan, the government in Beijing has taken a remarkably unyielding approach to it, locking down anyone who might possibly have come into contact with it. Forcibly separating, learning to live with COVID, China is still relentlessly trying to stamp it out. Fine, but when it comes to locking down Shanghai and parts of Beijing itself, people start complaining.
Go to the shops and get supplies. There's this whole culture going back to the very early era of the communist era of gated communities. So you've got security guards on the gates in people's homes, and you can't just nip out because there's a security guard who will stop you. Stuck in their homes and reliant on people bringing them supplies.
But who brings them supplies then?
There will be people in other areas that are not under lockdown that will work together, volunteers, to bring supplies to the gate of these communities, but in a situation stranded in a community.
And you're hearing stories also about food shortages and so on?
I mean, I've seen a lot of posts on Sina Weibo, which is China's equivalent of Facebook and or Twitter, of just bare vegetable aisles. COVID strategy that the government's shown no intention of changing anytime soon is really making people feel anxious because they've done everything the government told them to do. They've got vaccinated, they've just maintained exactly what every day there's a message from state media that the West is attacking China on its COVID-19 policy and that the West is The West has not been able to handle COVID-19 well. It really is a telling moment for China because it hasn't changed its strategy.
The extraordinary problems which Peru is going through. After only 9 months, Pedro Castillo, a science teacher turned union leader who became president with virtually no national political experience.
Facts of the war in Ukraine hitting the country too, because prices shot up, especially fuel prices and fertilizers prices, also the price of wheat and cereals that the country needs to import. That Pedro Castillo could be a solution for the lasting problems of the country. They feel now that he's not delivering.
And of course, he's not a career politician.
For most of his time, he's been a peasant and a teacher in Peru. It's a very isolated area, and that can give you an idea of his mindset or of where he comes from. And I would say that's a factor very relevant because it poses a sharp contradiction. Strong criticism from media outlets, strong criticism from the opposition. When he won the election, as it happened in the US with Donald Trump and Joe Biden, Keiko Fujimori, his rival, didn't recognize.
Of course, traditionally, the solution in most of Latin America has always been that some strong man would move in. Is that now a possibility in Peru?
He committed human rights violations, and his legacy is still quite controversial. His daughter, Keiko Fujimori, was Mr. Castillo's rival in the election, and a historical trend in the Latin American left. And these left-leaning movements always want to push for constitutional change to start a new economic and political model. And that's
without Russia, the Western allies would have taken years longer to defeat Hitler, if indeed they ever would have. The Russian army in Ukraine now isn't showing any of the drive and determination it showed against Nazi Germany early to know. Well, that's it from the Unspun World team and from me. Until we meet again, goodbye.
दिल में साहस का एहसास बनके उम्मीदों को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम साथ निभाते हैं
In harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist since 1933. Barso se sarso.